We're back with our third episode with super agent Leonard Armato.
Paint the picture so these two alpha males could get along together, could play together, could appreciate each other, could feed off each other.
Do you think Team USA made the right call here, snubbing her?
Caitlin Clark is the biggest story in women's basketball by far. There's no even close second.
Do you recall any situation where Shaq wanted to play in Dallas? Like what's the Dallas connection here?
I've known Mark since he bought the Dallas Mavericks. Shaq always respected him as an owner. Mark was a player's owner.
We're back with our third episode with super agent Leonard Armato. Leonard, it's a pleasure for you to join us here. And for those who are new to the series, Leonard has represented premium NBA talent like Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then on the women's side, Lisa Leslie. Not only basketball, really all their sports, Oscar De La Hoya, and many others. So Leonard, pleasure to bring you back on.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a fun conversation, Vishal. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the best place to start is definitely the media circus that's going on with Caitlin Clark, as usual. Like, we can't get through, 2 days in the news cycle without something about Caitlin, and it's usually never about what's going on the court. But luckily, something did happen on the court where the Fever, the Indiana Fever, were playing the Chicago Sky, and Chennedy Carter had a pretty hard foul on Caitlin that was away from the ball, right? I mean, you could even call it a cheap shot. And Angel Reese definitely chimed in and added her own color on what happened in the situation, and basically said, hey, that was a clean foul, like no lines were crossed, to paraphrase. What are your thoughts on the incident overall, and do you think they crossed the line kind of defending her like that?
Well, it's so interesting because Caitlin Clark is such a huge story. I mean, everything she does is drawing all kinds of scrutiny. In fact, she's almost above and beyond the game itself. It's almost like Caitlin Clark did this, people did that to her, she didn't make this team, she did. So it's really a lot more about her and what's happening in her life, because people are extremely interested in Caitlin Clark. As far as her getting roughed up, if it were a men's basketball game, if it was the NBA, nobody would be saying anything. I mean, if you remember, Michael Jordan used to get the crap beat out of him, and people would say something, but it wasn't like, oh, poor Michael Jordan. So I think when it comes to women's sports, I think as a culture, we're conditioned not to like women getting roughed up. And so they're roughing her up a little bit, but it's sort of part of the game of basketball. If you go back into the history, you have the bad boys of Detroit, and they would just like slam everybody when they would come through the key. And you had all kinds of things like that throughout the history. The enforcer, Charles Oakley. I mean, there was all kinds of different examples throughout all of basketball where rough play was part of the game. But with women's basketball, obviously, people are a little bit more up in arms about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I only see this as a positive for the game overall. This is very normal, right? I would say in the NBA, and it's most obvious when Shaq got to the league, and there was obviously a target on his back, and people were physical with him. And correct me if I'm wrong, but were you representing Hakeem before Shaq?
Yeah, so I was representing Hakeem, before, and then I got Shaq as well. So I had both of them, at a really key time in both of their career. Hakeem was a little bit older and more experienced, and when Shaq came into the league, I introduced them, and Hakeem actually helped him and worked with him, and they became friends even before Shaq was in the league. And then interestingly enough, by the time Shaq, I think, hit his third season, he was in the NBA Finals against Hakeem, and that was a fun time.
Yep. Did Hakeem, was there a mutual respect there, or would you say they were more like rivals after that series?
I think there was always a mutual respect. In fact, Shaq said I respected him way too much.
Yeah.
And, you know, he didn't like him as much, I think he said. But, they both obviously were extraordinary players, had a little bit different styles, but so effective in their own way. And Hakeem was an amazing player, a tremendous human being, and always willing to help others. If you recall, he has a history of helping a lot of players over time. I mean, he helped Shaq, he helped Kobe, he helped LeBron. So Hakeem has got this sort of like legacy of helping players realize their potential. That great footwork he had, the dream shake.
Yes. The dream shake was definitely memorable, and I was not old enough to watch, but I have seen the 30 for 30, so definitely have seen my fair share of Hakeem play. But going back to Shaq, do you remember like that first welcome to the NBA style moment that Shaq had when he got roughed up? Like any significant memories come back there?
Yeah, well, every team was trying to play him physical because he was so dominant. And, any new player like that with all the marketing deals, and he was doing music and he was doing movies, and, people wanted to put him in his place, but they really couldn't. I mean, he was, all-star right out of the box.
But that's great. That's great that we brought up Shaq, because another ex-client of yours, Lisa Leslie, had some similar things to say in the Caitlin Clark saga, where she talked about Caitlin being snubbed for the Olympics. Do you think Team USA made the right call here, snubbing her, or is it a basketball decision that she got left off the team? Like, is this only basketball?
Well, let's say Caitlin Clark is the biggest story in women's basketball by far. There's no even close second. So everything she does, everybody looks at, everybody watches. She's also probably, forget about whether she's the best or not the best, she's probably the most exciting player in basketball because of her long distance shooting in terms of women's basketball. So she's popular, the most popular. She's exciting, probably the most exciting, if not, arguably the most exciting. And there's really precedent for allowing a college athlete to come on the Olympic team. At least they usually have one of them come on there. I remember going all the way back to Christian Laettner when he came out of Duke and they put him on the Olympic team instead of Shaquille O'Neal. So there's been precedent for that. I think they made a mistake not to put her on, quite frankly, because it would definitely juice up television ratings for them for sure. It would definitely increase interest in Team USA for sure. And the question of whether she's better right now than some of these WNBA vets, okay, maybe they're better still because she hasn't quite acclimated to the WNBA game, but there's no reason to leave her off the team because it only is going to help the team. So that would be my assessment of the situation.
So it's interesting you bring up it would make sense to have her on the team because I saw a report that said they were concerned with the potential backlash of her coming off the bench and not playing significant minutes. And that would almost be worse as much as leaving her off the team. How do you see that? Because I kind of do see that standpoint of like, if she only played 5 or 10 minutes, I think people would be really upset tuning in and they didn't see her.
I don't buy that at all.
No.
Because what's going to happen? No, because she's on the team, there's more interest in the game, and people are going to watch and see how much she plays. And when she comes in and starts draining all these threes, everybody will be like, oh my gosh, Caitlin Clark came in the game, she drained all these threes. If she doesn't play well and she gets taken out, then they'll just say, well, she needs more experience for international ball. I mean, I don't see a downside at all having her on the team and, worrying about whether people are going to get mad that she's not playing enough. I think people are going to get madder by having her left off the team completely.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good way to spin it. And also, I think on the exposure front, like, wouldn't this bring more exposure to everybody on the team and then everybody playing international? Like, I feel like this is just great for not just Caitlin, but the rest of the field. But
I mean, look, the more people that watch, the more opportunity you have to let the product speak for itself. So exposure is really important. So she's brought more exposure to the sport. And now the sport has to stand on its own because at some point, there's the Caitlin Clark story, and then there's the WNBA story. So eventually the Caitlin Clark story will disappear into the WNBA story to a degree. So the product itself has to stand on its own after it gets the right kind of exposure. So that's what we're waiting to find out.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And again, like playing for Team USA is such an honor, right? For especially a young athlete and somebody from this country. You know, Shaq won a gold medal with the team, you know, put in his resume. It's huge to have that gold medal, right? Like with any other great basketball player. And what's interesting is you also represented Kareem, and Kareem is famous for boycotting the 68 Olympics, you know, obviously earlier on in his career. Have you ever had any conversations with him on his Olympic stance and kind of how that process took a mental toll on him?
No, but you know, Kareem, I didn't represent Kareem then, back in 1968. Was he still Lou Alcindor then? I'm just trying to remember.
I believe he was.
Changed his name.
Yeah,
I believe he was still Lou Alcindor. And I believe this was during the period where we were still in the situation where there's a lot of protests going on. He was an activist, if you recall.
Yes.
So it was a different period, a different time, and we actually never discussed it. But if you do recall, he was prominent in a number of these different civil rights demonstrations. He was prominent in a lot of things that he believed in. It was during the time where a lot of people were protesting the Vietnam War, I believe. So there were many reasons why he likely boycotted, but I never did speak with him about it because I didn't start representing him until the mid 80s, you know, late 80s. That's when I started working with him.
No, that's interesting. And I think for me as a modern fan, the most fascinating part of the Olympics now are the players that come and play are basically recruiting each other and seeing what potential fits there could be. I remember the story of LeBron, Bosh, and Wade coming together and playing together before they all went to Miami. And that was a big driving force of them seeing, hey, this could really, really work well together. That's very prevalent in the modern day. I'm curious from your standpoint, when Shaq was playing on the 96 team, was recruiting players and kind of teaming up as big of a conversation back then, or is that more of a modern thing?
No, it wasn't. And if you think about it, the influence of pro athletes, particularly basketball players, have increased dramatically over the years.
Yeah.
Kareem, for example, was the first one that sort of exercised it a bit. He said he didn't want to play for the Milwaukee Bucks any longer, and his owner was nice enough to let him get out of it by trading him to the Lakers. Was nice enough to allow Kareem to be traded to the Lakers because he wanted to live in Los Angeles. That was sort of the beginning. And the idea of athletes being able to control their destiny in terms of where they play started to evolve. When Shaq was playing with the Orlando Magic, he became a free agent and ultimately went to the Lakers because of what Jerry West put on the table for him, which then led the Lakers to Kobe Bryant. We talked about that in the last episode because Kobe was the 13th pick of the first round of the NBA draft that the Lakers had to trade for in order to get Shaq. So it was very serendipitous. Following that, we've seen players like LeBron and Dwayne Wade exercise their influence, their power as athletes to combine together to form a championship team. And that was sort of one of the first times we really saw players conspire with each other to form like super team. And that just goes to show how powerful these athletes are. And you see this all the time now where athletes start talking to each other about wanting to play together. And the influence they have continues to increase more and more and more in basketball, in culture, and in business.
No, that's I love that breakdown, and I love you talking about the Lakers in that breakdown. Is obviously the Lakers are in the mainstream media news more than ever with their recruitment of Dan Hurley as the coach. And, from the outside looking in, it looked like it was a done deal and they were about to give him a record contract that would beat Monty Williams' deal with the Pistons. And to my surprise, they significantly came under that. And I think it was pretty underwhelming for him to leave, his situation at UConn to come to LA. What were your initial thoughts when you first heard about Hurley coming to LA? And did you think it was actually realistic he would take the job?
Well, I didn't know. And I thought the Lakers might be pretty persuasive in getting him to take that job because it's such a storied franchise. And he probably thought long and hard about it because it is a challenge, no question. And it makes me think back to when Shaq was with the Lakers and Kobe was together with him and the beginning of their relationship and how there was a little bit of tension that existed between them. And then it took like a Yoda, like Phil Jackson, to come in and figure out how to, really paint the picture so these two alpha males could get along together, could play together, could appreciate each other, could feed off each other. And that all worked and that all happened. And it's very interesting in the NBA now because star players have so much power. And it's very, very rare that a coach can come in and command enormous respect because these star athletes can look at most coaches and say, I make more than you, I know more than you, you can't tell me anything. And by the way, if I don't like you and the team doesn't get rid of you, I'm going to go somewhere else. Yeah. So they have a lot of power. But I'll tell you, back in the Phil Jackson might be the last of the Mohicans, or maybe Greg Popovich, the last of the Mohicans, the last of the respected coaches that just really had every single player looking at them with reverence. And I think Popovich still has that because of his history of success. I think Phil Jackson had that. Shaq talks about Phil with great reverence. Kobe used to talk about Phil with great reverence. So people like that are few and far between now in the NBA. And I think the Lakers might have been thinking, well, this college coach has really achieved a lot. He might really, really garner the respect of the top players.
I think it's a lot of interesting points you touched on there. We're definitely going to get to a few of these. I think where I want to start is the part of player empowerment and how players have this much larger influence on the coaching decisions than they used to have. And I think a big part of this is LeBron having a relationship with JJ Reddick. And I believe personally that's where a lot of the noise of JJ being the next coach came from, even though he doesn't have formal coaching experience, right? Like,
right.
And then now you mentioned Phil, like, what are your thoughts on these new coaches kind of coming in with no formal coaching experience? Because it kind of worked with Steve Kerr, where it's like, obviously he was an assistant coach on a variety of organizations, but he never had a head coaching role. Like, do you think this is going to be a consistent theme of like former players breaking in and not going through the, quote unquote traditional process of kind of putting in the years in order to get ready to be a coach?
I don't know. I don't know how important it is to be an assistant coach for a number of years to be a head coach. I really don't. I personally, I don't think it matters. I think it really has to do with the person, the leadership quality. I mean, JJ Reddick was a pro player. He's been in the system. He knows the game. The question is, can he command the respect of these players? And can he make the important decisions necessary to put the right group of players on the court at the same time? So if he has the respect of the players because he's played, because he's intelligent, he's a student of the game, if he has good decision making when it comes to substitutions and things of that nature, player personnel stuff, then I wouldn't hesitate to hire him if I believed that he instinctively had the capability to do that. I think he could do that as easily as some person that's been in the let's call it the organization somewhere as an assistant coach or comes from the outside as an assistant coach. I don't know what more you need to know other than to be a player, be coach, see how the system works, and how much respect do these players have for you. I mean, that would be my take on it. So
No,
I wouldn't oppose JJ. I wouldn't oppose him.
Mhm.
I mean, that's just me. I would not oppose him. But at the same time, who knows? I mean, does he have that great decision making? He seems like a highly intelligent, highly
Yes.
analytical guy. So, I would throw my hat in the ring for him.
He really does, and I loved your point of Shaq almost looking at Phil as a mentor, and I think yeah, I'm almost nostalgic about those coaching relationships, like the ones you brought up with Phil and Pop. Do you remember any
Mhm.
specific either stories or just situations that created that dynamic with Phil? Like, what about Phil? And I know they called him the Zen master. Like, what was it really about Phil that built that relationship, especially with Shaq?
Well, Phil walks in and he's got how many championship rings on his fingers just
Yeah.
walking in the door. I mean, he coached Michael Jordan and
Really?
they won all the time. And so he basically stopped at the top of his game. And the Lakers brought him back to figure out how the two best players in the game were going to work together and win championships.
Yeah.
And he sat him down in an unconventional way. He'd make them read books that were like philosophy books. He'd have them meditate. He'd have them do things that they'd never done before, and really talked about how, people have to treat each other with great respect and great equanimity and all kinds of deference, and not just look at things like through the lens of their own ego.
Mhm.
And if you know what an alpha male is like, an alpha male wants to be the dominant person in the pack. They don't like to take second place to anyone. And when you have two people that feel the same way, there's always going to be some conflict. And so Phil was the one person that could sort of get these two alpha males to coexist in a way that was going to feed off their combined talents.
Yeah.
And when they did, it was incredible. I mean, they won 3 championships in a row together.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And one of my favorite stories with Phil is how it would always seem like Kobe would go to Dr. Buss and Shaq would go to Phil when they had problems, and it seems like that was kind of the favorites they were playing. And Phil, if it was up to Phil, he would have, correct me if I'm wrong, but he would have actually chosen to keep Shaq.
Well, here's what happened. They
Yeah.
started off having the conflicts of being, Shaq was the alpha male who was it was his team, and he was a veteran with lots of accolades in the NBA already. Kobe came in as a rookie, wasn't willing to defer to anybody, so there was instant conflict. Then they figured out after a few years through the help of Phil how to work together. And I'll never forget when Shaq won an award it was some big award, and we asked Kobe to present the award. And so Kobe came in and actually agreed to present Shaq with this award. And then Shaq turned around and said, thank you very much. Kobe Bryant's the best player in basketball.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shaquille O'Neal. When Cedar-Sinai called me about 9 months ago and said, we want you to accept this award, I told them jokingly that I would not accept this award unless the greatest player in basketball gave me the award. And I said once before that Kobe Bryant was the greatest player in the game, and I meant that when I said that.
And when he said that, it was like, wow, that was such an homage to Kobe and a olive branch to him in a lot of ways. And for the next few years, they got along amazing. Now, I stopped representing Shaq right around the time that the conflict resurfaced. So I wasn't really there for the time when Shaq got traded to the Miami Heat. So I wasn't involved in that. And I don't know, it was really disappointing that the relationship actually went back the other way.
No, that's a fascinating story, and it's something I don't think has been much talked about. And then even staying on Shaq and those trade rumors on this week's podcast, he was talking a lot about how he told Dirk that he tried to go to the Mavs many times over the course of his career to team up with him. And I personally have never heard any of that. Like, do you recall any situation where Shaq wanted to play in Dallas? Like, what's the Dallas connection here?
It's interesting. Shaq loves Dallas as a city.
Okay.
And I think he actually has a home there.
Okay.
And Mark Cuban has a place right next to me in Manhattan Beach and has had this place for years. I've known Mark since he bought the Dallas Mavericks.
Mm-hmm.
And we would always chat because I was representing Shaq. And Mark would say, well, gee, I wish I had somebody like Shaq on my team. And we both talked about the fact he couldn't pursue that conversation because it would be tampering, and we would laugh about it. And he didn't. He never crossed the line. But Shaq always respected him as an owner. Mark was a player's owner. You see him. He's with the team. He's right by the bench. He's shooting baskets with the team. He treats all of his players beautifully. They all love him. So like I said, he's a player's owner, and he's always commanded the respect of his players and always taking care of them. So Shaq, and I know Shaq likes him. So I don't know if there were any conversations, but the only conversation I ever had with Mark was he would love to have Shaq, of course. Yeah. And we can't talk about it even though we're neighbors.
Sure. And any recent conversation with Mark, especially with the finals run?
I haven't seen Mark lately. I saw him and we talked for a few minutes at the Super Bowl.
Okay.
We saw each other he did a Q&A at one of the events surrounding the Super Bowl, and I saw him. We chatted for a minute, but I haven't seen him since his team has made the run to the finals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what's fascinating is obviously the finals are going on right now, and the viewership for Game 1 is significantly down, and I read it was the lowest since 2007, which is. It comes as a shock to me, but I'm gonna watch every game every year anyway. So it's like I'm not the casual fan that obviously they need to kind of bolster these ratings. Now I know LeBron and Steph and these big names are not in the game, and we've seen drop off versus these Warriors Cavs series that were really dominating mainstream media for a few years. Do you attribute this loss to the lack of star power in the actual finals? Because I feel like Luka's still a big name, and Tatum in the Celtics, but I could be wrong. Like, how are you looking at this rating drop?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. The NBA's had a great year. Their ratings have held up. They're about to finish a terrific media deal. Adam Silver's done an amazing job orchestrating it and kind of leading us into the next level of sports properties and their media deals that are so complicated and so sophisticated. But it's hard to understand why. I don't think that Jason Tatum and Jason Brown, the two stars of the Celtics, certainly draw the kind of national attention that a LeBron does or a star of that. On the Dallas side, Dallas is a relatively small market, so you might not be getting that much of all the big markets like Chicago and Los Angeles and some of the San Francisco and some of the other ones that typically tune in. Although last year Denver is not a big market, and they got a decent amount of people watching them as the Nuggets won, and people started to really enjoy watching the Joker.
Denver, Miami. I wouldn't even put Miami as a top media market, right? Relative to the rest of the league. So it's like that. That's certainly interesting. And even going back to what you said about with the players of you have Jalen and Jason Tatum and Luka, do players care about any of this? Because I know the media makes a big deal out of it. In your conversations, even with players, is are they even paying attention to these ratings?
I don't think they do.
Right?
Certainly if someone said, "Oh, you got this really high rating," they'd be, "Oh, that's cool." If they were playing the game, but they check the papers and find out what the rating is, or they check the internet. That's more the leagues. The leagues are always looking at that. What are the ratings and how are we doing and what can we do to make them higher? And I mean, it's a big deal. So let's see how this thing plays out.
And even now, taking like a wider lens on the whole media rights conversation, I know we've progressed a long way since the first time we spoke about it like a month ago. I think Adam Silver has even apologized to TNT employees, for inside the NBA and how this is kind of turning. And I think he has spoken a lot about this in the past, but how the future of sports is in streaming, right? And potentially doing a bigger deal with Amazon Prime. Like, how do you see the long-term business outlook of something like the NBA fully transitioning to streaming and like Amazon Prime?
Well, when you're talking about streaming, I think the thing that you're mainly talking about is direct to consumer.
Yeah.
So just think about direct to consumer. Direct to consumer means that you have a one-to-one relationship with every fan. And Amazon has a one-to-one relationship with everybody that buys products from them. I mean, or anybody that's a member of. So I think that's what they're talking about. I mean, if the NBA could, through the NBA app, get everyone in the world that's a basketball fan to pay them a direct-to-consumer subscription fee, they would be making 5 times as much as they are right now on their current media deal. So ultimately, the future of all this is direct-to-consumer because that's what's going to happen. In the meantime, there's so many different options for people to watch basketball. And one of the reasons that NBA wants to keep their deal with ESPN because they have an over-the-air network called ABC that has wide distribution, 130 million homes, and then or more. And then they have NBC, which is also over-the-air. So what some people are doing now is they're cutting the cord or never having the cord. They're streaming, and then they're just putting up a simple antenna to pick up the over-the-air free networks. So it's a very interesting time. And then these over-the-air networks have something called multicast, where they can put more than one channel over the air, and you can pick those up for free as well. So it's a really interesting world. There's over-the-air, there's still cable, it's shrinking, there's streaming, and then there's a so-called direct-to-consumer app that the networks that the sports teams can roll out. So anything that's not covered by their deals with all the media companies, the over-the-airs, the streamers, the cables, they can then go direct to consumer. So it's a really interesting, complicated world, and all kinds of things are happening going forward. I mean, you could even theoretically purchase games in parts. Like, I only want to buy games if it's close, or I only want to buy games if they are important in the standings, or I only want to buy the fourth quarter of games because that's what I'm interested in. I don't want to see a whole game. I mean, there's all kinds of options
they
out
got to
there
figure
now.
out a red zone package, right? It's like, I think there's definitely a formula in there. That's something the NBA really has to figure out.
I know. And the other thing everybody talks about, announcers. I mean, traditionally what happens is each one of the networks has their own announcers. So, my suggestion, and look, full transparency. I'm friends with Adam Silver, but I haven't discussed this with him. So this is just me talking. But what I would do was I would take Shaq and Charles and Ernie and Kenny, and I would just say to NBC and to TNT that you guys are going to use them as your people across networks. So not just let them be, because they need the platform, they need the exposure. So if the idea was to give TNT a small package, then you would see Shaq and Charles and Kenny and Ernie relegated to a very, very small number of games, and NBC would have all this tonnage. But I would do it so that Shaq and Kenny and Ernie and Chuck could go across, NBC and Turner and make that package, seamless in a lot of ways, and then that would solve your problem. Do you like that?
I really like that, because I've even seen, Barkley talk about where he's saying, he called ESPN idiots and has really no faith in them producing like a great pregame, postgame show around.
You said ESPN? You say
ESPN.
ESPN or
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he called the ESPN the ESPN brain trust running the NBA shows idiots, right? And I'll say this because I really don't like their pregame, postgame, and even their halftime commentary. I think nobody gets to talk. Like, there's really no real analysis. There's no witty banter or kind of chemistry between them. And I think, to your point, Shaq, Kenny, Chuck, right, Charles, and Ernie and the team have it. Like, why not put them across every network and centralize it? Like, I think that's a great idea. I wonder politics is, I guess, would be my guess on why we will probably never see that.
I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't discussed this with anybody at the league.
Yeah.
But I would say that if Adam really wanted that to happen, he could probably require it to happen.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. So it depends on how much leverage he has, but I would say at this point he has a lot of leverage.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, and I love you putting it out in the universe. So it's out there, and
what happens.
Yeah.
If it happens, you heard it here first. If it didn't happen, oh well.
Well, hey, it should happen. Even if it doesn't happen, it should happen. I think that's the point, right? Yeah. That you're making. And on the other side of the coin, with kind of bringing it back to women's basketball, Breanna Stewart made big news launching her 3-on-3 league, and with the hope of creating more financial opportunities, right, for the players. Now, even more so, like, we can go back and forth on, hey, will this make money? Is this going to work? Like, I think everyone's done that conversation. I think from your standpoint of someone who's created like a volleyball league and has participated in kind of going 0-1, and especially female sports, like, what would your advice be to Breanna and even the league on how to create a sustainable product here?
Put the rim at 9 feet.
Yeah, I've heard this multiple times. Yeah, from you.
No, I know. Or I've always been an advocate of that, so they can out. But I mean, I don't know. The WNBA has to continue to evolve and grow its fan base, grow its viewership. Because I don't think you're going to get better viewership for 3-on-3 basketball as a derivative of 5-on-5. So it's not going to eclipse 5-on-5. Like, it's not people. I don't think people are going to say, "Oh, we love 3-on-3 basketball way more than 5-on-5, but we're going to watch that."
Yeah.
So we don't know. I mean, we've seen the same thing with 3-on-3 men's basketball. I mean, put Big Three aside, that's more of like an old timers, entertainment property. But they do 3-on-3 basketball as an Olympic sport. So we have seen it, and people don't seem to be that excited about men's 3-on-3 or women's 3-on-3 basketball watching it. So I don't know if this league can do that well. I mean, I hope these women make money. I hope they do well. I don't root against them. But I don't know how you think of it in terms of being able to eclipse what the WNBA is doing. And the WNBA is always looking to create a bigger viewing audience. Yeah.
And I think you make an interesting point on just even the diversification of revenue streams and all the different avenues these athletes and leagues are trying. Like, one I've always been bullish on personally is sports cards and memorabilia. I think that's such a big part of especially legends, right? And I think a big news cycle this week was a Michael Jordan autographed card sold for $2.9 million. And that's the highest ever, right, recorded so far for a card. Any thoughts on the business of trading cards in general? And then even a follow-up to that, do the players actually like profit in these things, or is it just an upfront thing where you just get paid to sign it and you don't actually make any money after that?
Now, the trading card deals memorabilia deals can be really big for players. I mean, it started when When Shaq first came into the league, we did a huge deal just to start off his career, and that was like his most lucrative deal out of the box. So memorabilia, physical cards has always been something that people love, and it's just a physical connection to something that they have great fandom over. The digital collectibles sort of came up and down, but there's always going to be a place for digital collectibles, and I'm sure they'll come back to a degree as well. But the memorabilia business and the trading card business, I don't think has ever been stronger. A lot of people love it, and it's definitely the source of significant revenue for athletes.
As we kind of wrap this episode, I kind of wanted to talk about the podcasting business as a whole, and not only the trend of athletes creating podcasts, but now we're seeing like the biggest names, right? Like the marquee superstars like LeBron starting his own podcast and kind of putting a unique spin, right, on what he's doing with JJ Reddick and breaking down the game of basketball. Like looking at podcasting more of a medium, and I know this wasn't around, right, especially when you were with Shaq. Like, what do you think it is about the business now that's attracting a lot of these athletes? Because I would say it is somewhat of a saturated space at this time.
Well, it's saturated, but you have to think of it like this. If you have a big audience and you can convert your audience to a listener, the advertisers, it's high engagement. So you get a really high CPM, a really high amount of money per listener that advertisers are willing to pay. There's very low cost of entry. You just set up a couple cameras. You don't have to have low production costs. Like you and I are doing a podcast right now. There's no production costs or very little associated with it. And it's really kind of the talk show of the future. So think about it. You're going direct to consumer. You're aggregating all those people that love you. And by the way, if you do a nice job, you're going to get people outside of your fan base to come on board, and they're going to hear about it and they're going to listen to it. You own it. You own the IP. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a great example of somebody that's, created this ecosystem that's really almost like the media company of the future. And it's like Dave Portnoy. So Dave Portnoy comes in, and he basically has created a media company and an ecosystem of people who believe in the same things he believes in, and sort of has this cascading effect that really impacts culture in a way that he impacts culture. Whether you like him, you don't like him, he's got a lane that is very valuable. And it's a little bit the same thing with podcasts. You have people with influence that get others to come on their show, and you have that combination of influence that all of a sudden starts snowballing, and it's fertile grounds for those people with a big following. Now you have to do a good show and people have to like it, but there's the opportunity with a very low cost entry to build a valuable asset.
No, I love that you brought up Barstool and Portnoy as a template, because I would say that's probably the biggest success story of exactly what you're talking about, right? I mean, Leonard, this was a pleasure to host this third episode, and we will be bringing this live, so I'm really excited to do the next few here in person, right? I think that's going to bring a fun element. I would say if anyone has any comments here and has made it to the end, to drop some topics that would be fun to talk about.
All right, well, thank you very much, and I'll see you guys soon.